A useful tip for debate or philosophy more broadly is that sometimes it could really help to gain clarity or expose bad reasoning by taking philosophical language and just turning it into ordinary, simple language. And by doing that, you could sometimes expose bad thought, bad reasoning a lot more clearly. So here's a really good example of this occurring. The context here is that two people are debating moral realism, and basically one's going, look, you should accept moral realism because it's really plausible. And the person who doesn't accept moral realism is like, yeah, not to me, I don't find it plausible, so I'm not going to accept it. Now there's a stalemate because you can't both maintain that somebody should adopt a starting position based off what seems plausible to them, and then maintain that your interlocutor should adopt your position because it's plausible to you, while knowing it's not plausible to them. That's inconsistent. So if you want to maintain that they should adopt your position, you either have to abandon plausibility as the deciding factor and appeal to something like reasons, and if you're not willing to do that, you're just going to have to admit that appealing to plausibility as the deciding factor for the individual creates a stalemate. But then, of course, there's always this third option that I completely didn't account for, which is that when in doubt, assert that your opponent's view entails global skepticism, even if you don't know how, or that it actually does.
And I understand that it may not seem plausible to you, in which case you may be stuck in an epistemic pit.
Right, but what seems most plausible is that it's not the case that things would be wrong even if we thought otherwise. So we start with my view.
But
okay, so then why would we start with yours instead of mine?
Because they are so much more plausible.
Okay, so that's roughly the stalemate, right? If we're deciding between views based off plausibility, well, that's a person-based thing. That's subjective. So I don't even know what it means to say, we take my view, like you should take my view because my view is more plausible? What? If you mean more plausible to you, like, right, person A should take my view because my view is more plausible to me, that makes no sense. Why should person A care what's more plausible to me as a deciding factor? And if the plausibility of the view was not in reference to my own plausibility structures, but like the inherent nature of the view, then I think we're talking nonsense. I don't know what it means for a view to have like this inherent characteristic of plausibility. Huh? But let's get back to the radical skepticism.
Here's why you are a radical skeptic. Although you may not recognize this, but maybe we'll make progress on this. The radical skeptic says something like, you can't know anything, no belief is justified, something along these lines. You offer, or sorry, not you, I offer an argument. I start with things like, but here's a hand, or do you agree at least that there is something out there, or do we agree that our belief that 2 + 2 = 4 is justified, or something along these lines. And the radical skeptic, if they're worth their money at all, is going to say, no, of course I don't agree with any of that. And then at some point I'm going to say, look, but this is really extremely plausible as a starting point. And they're going to say, well, to me, what's extremely plausible as a starting point is that no belief is justified. Plug in, let's call it the Lance premise, which says that unless some reason can be given for why one starting point is better than another, they are to be treated equally.
Okay, so a few things. First of all, Lance never said the Lance premise, right? So I don't think he's quoting Lance there. I don't even think he's like paraphrasing anything Lance said. I think he's deriving the Lance, or he thinks he's deriving the Lance premise from the initial statement, which is merely that Lance doesn't find moral realism to be plausible. If that's the case, that's hilarious, because not finding X plausible, or moral realism, in this case, plausible, doesn't entail the Lance premise. I don't know where did that come from? That's just like the magic land of non-entailment that he pulled that one from. That's really funny to me. I don't know how he gets from one to the other. That's also what's hilarious is that if he somehow thinks it follows that because you have like an intuition or find some view plausible as a starting point, that you can, what did he say again? Oh my god, the Lance premise, which is that if you have a starting position and you don't have a reason to differentiate between the two, then you shouldn't? Yeah. If he thinks that follows from finding a starting view plausible, and if he thinks that that leads to radical skepticism, then he doesn't even need Lance to infer that his view entails radical skepticism. because he finds his own view plausible. And if he thinks finding an initial view plausible and that's reason to accept the initial view, and doing that entails the Lance premise, which is that if you have two views as a starting point and you don't have reason to differentiate between the two, then you should treat them as equal. If he thinks that follows from the plausibility of accepting an initial view, and that second step entails skepticism, well, then he's done it on his own. So he doesn't even need Lance to get global skepticism. And now he's a radical skeptic. What's also just so funny is that, like, the structure of the entailment, when put in normal language, is really funny. So in normal language, what he's saying is that, let's just apply this like an everyday conversation. Imagine if I said, it seems to me like the Seahawks are going to win the Super Bowl. And you go, nah, it doesn't seem to me that they will. Imagine if I went, wait, it doesn't seem to you that the Seahawks will win the Super Bowl? You know what that means, right? That means you don't know anything. And you go, what? I just find the proposition that the Seahawks are going to win the Super Bowl doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem to me that the Seahawks are going to win. How does that show that I now know nothing? And then I go, no, you don't understand. Because what you just said there about, oh, it doesn't seem like the Seahawks are going to win, somebody could also say that about absolutely everything. And in that case, they wouldn't believe anything. Imagine that. Imagine for the best proof that you could possibly give them, for any proposition that you try to convince them of or assert, they would go, well, it doesn't seem that way to me. Right? So we just took the response that you gave about the Seahawks, applied it to everything, and now, boom, you're a radical skeptic. That is the funniest I think that's like one of the funniest non sequiturs that I've seen from what I think is a professional philosopher. Like, imagine if you said that you didn't believe some random thing. It could be anything. You say, I'm not a flat earther. And I go, wait, you don't believe that the earth is flat? You go, no. I'm like, yeah, you're a radical skeptic. And you're like, no, I'm not. Oh, no, you don't understand. You're a radical skeptic. You're committed to radical skepticism. You just may not, have what it takes to work it out. But I've worked it out for you. You're a radical skeptic. You see, because if you disbelieve that the earth is flat, we could take your exact response there and just apply it to everything. And if you have that same doxastic attitude, well, we'd get skepticism, right? When I tell you that the earth is flat and you respond, I don't believe that, what if every time I told you anything, you'd have that same exact response? Do you see the problem here? I go, earth is flat. You go, don't believe that. I go, external world exists. You go, don't believe that either. I go, my hands exist. You go, don't believe that. You see? Plug in the Lance premise and we get radical skepticism pit. It's just crazy to me that the inference is like, take your one response to this one thing. If you had that one response to this one thing toward absolutely everything, then you'd be this. Therefore, you're this. How? How does someone cook that up? How? I don't get it. Where is that coming from? If you responded in the way you did when denying moral realism, namely by saying that it's not plausible to you, if you said that about absolutely everything, emphasis on the if, then you'd be a radical skeptic. Therefore, you're a radical skeptic or committed to radical skepticism? What? I feel like I must be missing something just because of how awful that inference is. Oh my god. I don't like philosophy anymore.